Hey guys, this is Andrew Aversa with Impact Soundworks, and today I'm going to show you our latest flagship library, JUGGERNAUT Cinematic Electronic Scoring Tools. Much like how Daniel James does his walkthroughs, I'd like to do the same kind of thing here and show you a track that I made using JUGGERNAUT, nothing else, no external samples, and then I'm going to show you sort of all the techniques for how to use the library, how you can apply this to your own compositions. So let's just jump right into it. I'm going to play the track first, and then we'll talk about it once we're done. But anyway, so that's the track, and what I think is cool about this is, it has a very modern sound, obviously, a lot of really big, epic, and dark elements, and this is done using nothing but JUGGERNAUT, so there are no external samples, very minimal external effects. So the first thing that you've probably noticed just looking at this project is that I have a lot of these audio clips. And these are samples from the library, various crashes. Here we have impacts. And then later on we have, here's a reversed kick. And we have more impacts. And then down here we have some textures. There's a drop. And then I believe there are a couple risers here. So one of the things about JUGGERNAUT is that you can actually use any of the effects or percussion samples as WAV files. So if you look here on the left, here are all the different samples. I'll just play a few. So those are just drops, for example, but then the impacts, plenty of good stuff here. So you have hundreds of different effects, and sometimes it makes more sense to just drag these into your project. You can use them within KONTAKT, but if you want to line them up to the beat precisely and do reverses, oftentimes it'll make more sense to just drag them in and line them up. Now, for percussion, we have every single one of the hundreds of percussive samples, and you can see each one has 10 variations. And then we also have a folder for single round robins, so this is really great if you want to use something like a program like FL Studio, which has its own step sequencer. You could drag in any of these drums and then you can just sequence them. So for example, you can take that kick and let's take a thip, put that there, and then maybe a simple snare. And this obviously is just a quick example, but you could sequence the drums like this very easily. So that's just another way that you can use the library. Now, most of the big impacts in this song are the pre-recorded samples, as you can hear. You can see I did a little bit of EQing to open up this impact here. So it's a bit more filtered. And then here, it's getting less filtered. But let's look at this big layer here. This is like a really huge mega hit. So let's take a look at the individual layers. So here we have, that's one sound in the library, and that's called, we'll open up the bass patch. This is called X Saturator. This is from the distortion category. And you can see I have a bit of built-in reverb and delay on that. So if I take those off, it's okay, but not quite as big. And they also have more release time. So that means it's going to carry out a bit at the end of the measure. The next bass sound is essentially all high frequencies. So let's take a look at that patch. This is from the fuzzy category, or fuzz. It's called unstable. You can see that I've cut all the low frequencies out with the EQ, and we have lots of reverb on it. So if we take that out, doesn't quite sound as good as a layer. So together, that's a really nice big sound. Here is a sweep sample that I tuned to the track. And here we have some more basses. Or actually, I think these are hits of some kind. Yeah, okay. So now we're looking at the drums patch, and in particular, this is the crunch kit. And there are tons of presets that come with Juggernaut. There are dozens and dozens of drum kits. And then, of course, you can build kits from scratch, but I'll show you that a bit more later. For now, the important thing is that we're using 2 individual hits from this kit, which already has saturation on it. So this already sounds great, just out of the box. Here's a nice big crunchy kick. And then we have a crash here. So when you combine them, that's a nice slam. So if we combine these first 3 layers, that's pretty nice. And then we'll take this impact here. Whoops, it's not filtered anymore. So that's actually not as big as you would expect by itself. But when you add in everything, it sounds pretty big. Here's an example of something you can do using any kick sample. If you just reverse it and then use it as a lead-in to a downbeat, you can get a really nice sort of whooshing sound. So if we combine that with everything, it's nice. And then you can also see I did the same thing with some crash effects. If I were to just show you that unreversed. Okay, so now we get to the subtler part of the track here. So basically, a few things are going on. Again, we have a few dragged samples, like this crash and this impact, which is nice and filtered. So we have a sort of a sub-bass layer here. And appropriately, it's named Super Sub. Now, this is generally unprocessed, but you'll notice that I changed the envelope here to have no sustain. And basically, you might have noticed this already, but the bass patch of Juggernaut is essentially a synthesizer with over 50 waveforms. So you can use this as you would use any other subtractive synth. You can, change the filter, you can change the filter envelope, LFOs. So in this case, I've taken most of the sustain away. And that gives it the more percussive feel, which is very useful when you're doing 8th and 16th note ostinatos. And again, the same applies really for any kind of synthesizer. Now, if I were to turn up that sustain, it's a little bit too present. So with the decay down a bit and the sustain all the way down, we get that, again, more percussive feel. Okay. And then next we have a thip sound. So here, this kit is underscore, appropriately named, and it has some different effects already. It has an EQ, reverb and delay, and transient design. So if we take all those off, and the delay is an 8th note delay, so that's very appropriate. Here we have another thip, and that's from the same underscore kit. And then this is a more interesting sound that was designed with the bass synth. So what's going on here is I've selected from the mover category something called Deep FM. Now, you'd be surprised to hear what this sounds like without any effects. So if I take off the effects, here's what we get. And then if I take the release down and the attack down, so it sounds totally different. By increasing the attack and release, you get that sort of airier and more ambient vibe, which is what I was going for. The EQ, again, taking out the low end, reverb and delay to give it more spatial effect. The big thing is the filter. The filter has a low cutoff. The depth is the depth of the envelope. And then the envelope is closing very, very quickly, meaning you're just getting a little bit of high end, and then it closes. So again, in context. So we have some transitional elements like this. And if we zoom in, this is why it's useful to use the wave files, because you can line them up to the beat as you like. Now over here, we start to get a buildup. So I'd like to show you this specific element because this is a good example of how you can use automation to bring out the sounds in Juggernaut even more. So this nice distorted sound is it's called Mega BP for bandpass. And again, lots of effects. It's got that same short percussive envelope with low sustain, no attack, low decay. And if we were to increase that sustain, it sounds totally different. If we take off the effects, and the EQ is very drastic here. It's taking almost everything out except for the high frequencies. Reverb, delay, and chorus gives it more, again, stereo and spatial. And then the filter is really just giving a little bit of extra motion with that envelope. But here's the important thing. If you look up here, you can see I have an envelope, an automation clip. Now you can do this in any digital audio workstation. In this case, I'm automating CC11, and that's because I right-clicked on this knob and I did Learn CC Automation, and then I moved my CC11 controller. So what that means is that I can use a MIDI CC to control the cutoff. Now at this point, I just want to point out that for the effects here, you can click on this and you can actually select from a number of presets of all different kinds. I don't want to select one here because I don't want to mess up the patch, but you can see there are 10. And we also have user presets that you can save. And same for the rhythmic sequencer, which I believe is used later in the track. We also have some new drum samples coming here. So these are 2 more drum kits. We have the Daftly kit, as well as the Goa Trance kit for the kick effect. And there's also a bigger bass here, I believe. Let's see. Yeah, okay, here's our big sort of sustained bass sound. This is very useful for layering. You can imagine this being great for, an orchestral hybrid score. So this one's called Tough Solid. And once again, we have an envelope. In this case, we're actually increasing the attack quite a bit, starting from a low cutoff. So what that means is that the envelope cutoff is going to rise and then it's going to fall again. But in this case, we get that nice sort of growing sound. Now, if I take off the EQ and filter, again, it sounds quite different. So I wanted to cut the high frequencies out. And actually, this is an example of the sweeper preset. Now, as this grows, we're eventually going to get even more sounds. So we have that, and then we have a reversed impact as well, which is pretty cool. Just reversing the impacts essentially gives you another several hundred samples between the impacts, the textures, and crashes and kicks. We also have some sort of pseudo-realistic percussion. This is called the Sin Orc kit. And if we look at some of the individual hits, this is supposed to be like a bass drum or timpani. Another bass drum. This is sort of a noise taiko or a noise timpani sound. Here's an ensemble slam. And this is like a cymbal or shaker. So when you put all that together again. Oh, right, and there's actually another layer. This one's called Sharp Teeth because it has a lot of very tight, short, high-frequency sounds. And one thing, hopefully you've noticed by now, is that the sequencing is very basic. I'm not really doing a lot of special stuff with velocities, nor am I doing any fancy layering with other sample libraries. This is all just out of the box. Very, very polished. Really, you can just drop it into your composition and it's going to sound great immediately. So then we have the big climax of the piece here. And this is, of course, really, really layered. So just like earlier, we have those hits. I believe this is the same. Right, we have that. This is also from earlier. But then we're adding some new stuff. That's a new impact, for example. We have the arpeggios from earlier. And then we have some more heavy percussion stuff. That big bass drum is from the Cinematic kit. And again, this is like a really, really nice sound, sort of mimicking orchestral sounds. Very thick. And the other one is from one of our, Big Beat kit. Now this is great for even electronic dance music, dubstep, all that sort of stuff. Just a really big, heavy sound. And most of that processing is coming, again, internally, just the Excite EQ and saturation. And I believe I have some minimal processing on the master track. Just a bit of EQ there. And some master limiting, but really nothing special. There's no, transient design or anything like that going on. In addition to that, there's a new synth sound. This crunchy arpeggio, once again, you can see I'm doing the trick with the low sustain and low decay. This is a great way to get those short synth staccato notes. And with over 50 waveforms, really the possibilities are just endless. If we take off some of these effects, it sounds pretty similar, but if you listen closely, the EQ is taking off quite a bit of bass. The phaser adds some subtle movement, and then the bit crusher is just for a bit of crunch and distortion, which is what I was going for, of course. And then let's see. These are those low sustains from earlier. Yet more crashes down here. And I believe this is a sort of a moving. Let's see. Right, so this is one of our motion drones, I believe. Yes. Okay. So this particular kit shows off the filter LFO that we have built in. So this particular sample that's being used is a sweep that comes with the library. So you can also find it as a WAV file. But we have tons of effects on it: phasing, amplification, saturation, reverb. But the big thing is the filter LFO, which is set to eighth notes. If I take that off, if I take the filter off as well, there's already some motion built in. But then if we add that, it gives even more sort of rhythmic drive to the piece. And down here, it's the same thing. So again, this is the Motion Drones patch, and this is just another one of the textures. And the fact that it has the LFO just makes it more interesting. For this climax, I wanted just a ton of motion, 16th notes, 8th notes, huge layers. And here we've added another synth. And this should probably come as no surprise. I've done the same thing, giving it a more percussive feel, reverb, delay, EQ, phasing for additional motion. And other than that, we just have additional crashes, and then there's a couple big risers at the end here. And actually, there's a reversed impact as well as a reversed crash. This is really big. And the big slam at the end is... that's from earlier. So is that the giant slam. Another kick. I believe this is another kick. And then here's a standalone impact. And last but not least, we have a texture. Really nice and dark. For this one, I actually, in my DAW, I changed the pitch to tune it, and that gave it even more of a sort of a dark sound because I tuned it so low. And then last but not least, there's some ostinatos at the end. Then everything fades out. So, so that's how I put this piece together. It only took me about an hour, maybe an hour and a half, just sort of doing basic sound design. Now, I'm actually a big synth aficionado. I designed many of the synth sounds in the library, along with sound designers Mick Gordon, Eric Ekholm from Birkwall Audio, Rasmus Fors, and a number of others, Josh Crispin, for example, Jennerdyne. But even though I spend a lot of time programming synths, I still think that using this library really saves a lot of time because you have tons of presets just built right in. For example, let me go down to the basses here. Let's take a look at this sound here. And you can see within this, there's a sequencer, which is, I did not use it in this song. I thought I did. I guess I didn't. And if we set this to something like Pulsar, it acts as either a retriggering sequencer or a rhythmic gate. In addition to the sequencer, which has volume levels there, if we turn off retrigger, it'll be more like a gate. There's also a saw gate, which adds an additional rhythmic element. So that's just the saw gate. Let's take a look at some other presets. For example, this preset uses the filter LFO. LFO sync to triplets. So that will not work if you don't have the filter on. But you can turn the filter on very easily, of course, just one click. And let's see, we have eighth notes here. And one of the things is, here, we'll do one more, syncopated. Let's see. Let's pick a sound that's a bit more... Right, there we go. So that's a really nice syncopated sound. So that's lots of fun. But one of the things I wanted to point out was that you can seamlessly change presets and keep your sequencer and effects presets the same. So as you browse the sounds here, in each category, if you have a setting that you like, you can keep that as long as the global button is enabled. If you want that to change, you can just disable that, or you can hit reset and it'll reset everything back to defaults. Very simple. And we also have the one-shots, which I use in some of the other demos. And those are great for shorter notes. But the important thing is that between the filter envelope, the sequencer, and the amplitude envelope, you can really make just about any kind of sound you want with a single patch. So when you factor in the fact, if you consider that there are over 50 waveforms built in, multi-sampled and looped, essentially you can create almost any sound within here. So even though it says bass, you can use this for, harmony parts. You can use it for leads if you want, for pads, which I use in some of the other demos, for staccato stuff. Really, the possibilities are endless. And for future expansions of Juggernaut and free patches, we want to add even more waveforms and capabilities to this. So definitely keep your eye out. And as a registered customer, you'll have access to all that. To look at the drum patch just real quick, and then we'll wrap up for now. You noticed, of course, the mixer channel interface. So we have volume, tuning, panning for each channel. We have 4 banks of 8 sounds. And all the effects, which of course you saw me using in the track. But to build your own patch, it's quite straightforward. So if I hit load, you can see there are different categories of sounds. Different sorts of kits, dance and trance, for example, orchestral and epic, small and underscores, lots of those. Now, if I hit initialize, it'll reset everything to the original state. And if you want to just browse, by the way, you can just hit the up and down arrows and there, go through everything that way. But for now, we'll just go back to the initialization patch. Here we go. Here we go. Okay. So if you want to build a kit, let's see, go up here. So I'm at the low note there. And if I click the sound category, I can pick what kind of sample I want to use. So we have kicks, snares, thips, crashes, splashes, tonal sounds, etc. And if you look in the upper right, you have a key right there, and it'll say which sound is which. This menu is used for auditioning, so if I click on kick, I get every single kick in the library. So let's say I find this one, kick 23, and I think, oh, that's great, I want that. And I want that on this channel. So click this, make sure kick is selected, and then I can actually double click and just type in 23, boom, done. Or I can click and drag to select the sound. Or I can increment and decrement through the samples using these arrows. So there are a lot of ways to put together a kit. It's very simple. You can transpose using these buttons here, or reset. Sometimes it makes sense to keep it in audition mode. For example, you could have one MIDI channel as just kicks. You could have the next MIDI channel just snares. And you can have a different output of KONTAKT for each one. Alternatively, if you find something like, let's say, a tonal sound, Any time you find a sound you like and you actually want to pitch it across the keyboard, you just hit solo sound. So that's really useful for the tonal stuff in particular. For example, if I go to effects and I go to textures, can solo that. And that's just a simple way of changing the tuning of any specific sound that you want. And that's something that I do frequently. And it's also fun just to repitch, for example, a snare, make it really high pitched, or you could do that with a kick and make it into more of an underscore sort of thippy sound. And there's also an envelope here, which allows you to make a very aggressive kit into something more subtle. You can increase the attack. Or you could decrease the sustain and decay, and you can get the more percussive short sound, which is great if you use the transient feature as well, transient and saturate. So there aren't any additional pages here. This is actually a very simple patch to use. Most of the time, you might find just using the preset kits is all you need to do. Select a kit, it's mapped to your MIDI keyboard, just load and play. But you might want to create your own kits, and then when you create something you like, you can just hit save, and you can name it whatever you want, and you're done. So that pretty much sums up the basic introduction to Juggernaut. If you're not familiar with synthesis, then you might be interested in watching a tutorial or two on just basic subtractive stuff to get a feel for what an envelope does, what attack versus decay and sustain, because this functions the same way as it does in any other synthesizer, stuff like Omnisphere. It's the same basic functionality. Likewise, with the sequencer, what you might want to do is sort of browse through these presets, find something you like, and then try editing it and see what kind of sound you get. And that's a great way to learn, is just to look at the presets. But anyway, we're really excited for this library. I think it's one of our very best yet. Certainly the interface is absolutely beautiful, designed by Constructive Stumblings, and the sound designers behind this are really just top-notch, best in the business. So I really have to thank them as well for all of their amazing contributions. Anyway, Juggernaut is available at impactsoundworks.com for an introductory price of $139, which will go up to $179 after it's been out for a few weeks. I think this is an amazing deal given how many sounds it has. There are over 500 sound sources, not to mention all of the presets, the kits, and the tweaking capabilities. So definitely check it out if you liked what you heard. Once again, this is Andrew Aversa with Impact Soundworks, and thank you for watching.